Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to TheNonProphets. This show is brought to you by the Atheist Community of Austin. I'm your host, Russell Glasser. Jeff D. is out today, and filling in are my guests, Paul Wilson.
Hi.
And Martin Wagner.
Hi there.
Today's opening music was Overachievers by Crash Test Dummies from the CD A Worm's Life. We are live November 22nd, 2003. The Atheist Community of Austin is a non-profit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have weekly meetings Sunday mornings at Hot Jumbo Bagel Shop, 307 West 5th Street at 10:30 a.m., except for the first Sunday of each month, when we have our lecture series at 12 p.m. in the mayor's room of the Austin History Center. ACA board meetings take place at 10 o'clock, right before our regular meetings on the second Sunday of every month. These meetings are open to all ACA members, but you can only vote if you're on the board of directors. Those of you who shop at Randall's can give them our nonprofit organization number, 5158, and have 1% of your purchases donated to the Atheist Community of Austin. The Godless Gamers meet every Monday night at 7 o'clock right here at Glasser Studios, my house. ACA Happy
Everything
Hour.
happens here.
Of course, yes.
The ACA, we don't need to buy a building for ACA. This is it.
That's totally true. We had a very successful potluck last week.
Mm-hmm.
Big
Which
turnout.
I'm very sorry I missed.
Yeah.
It was great.
An obligation.
ACA Happy Hour takes place at Antonio's Tex-Mex near Highway 35 and 183 every Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. Is that right? 7:30.
Yeah.
If you get there and don't see anyone else, hang around. Lots of people trickle in as the night goes on. For more information, call our voicemail at 512-371-2911 or visit our website at http://www.atheist-community.org. Add a /radio.htm to the end of that address to get to the web page for this show. Mm-hmm. And you can also hear rebroadcast episodes, about a half dozen or so. And finally, if you are listening to this show live on November 22nd, 2003, be sure to stop in the chat room.
Chat room.
Yes, go to atheistnetwork.com, which I assume you must be there already if you've been listening.
The chat room, yeah.
And click on the chat link.
Yeah. Well, people can listen to the show from the radio page on our website, right?
Yeah, they can.
You still have that live feed link there, don't you?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that works, actually. I have to check that out.
No, it does work, because I've used that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it does work.
All right.
Just it plugs right into iTunes for me, so it works fine. Multi-platform compatible.
Okay. So, here we are.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Let's see. I guess I'll go first, unless you want to.
No, you've got the big news stories.
Okay.
The big news stories are yours.
Well, this isn't a big news story, but it's interesting. Guess who doesn't believe in God? 10% of Protestants, 21% of Roman Catholics, and 52% of Jews do not believe in God. And I count myself among the numbers of that last group.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
That's the surprising word from a new survey by Harris Interactive of 2,306 adults that shows belief in God varies quite widely among different segments of the American public. How often do we go to a place of worship? Not much. Most people attend a religious service less than once a month. Still, Americans are far more likely to believe in God and to attend religious services than people in most other developed countries, particularly in Europe. While 79% of Americans believe there is a God, only 66% are absolutely certain of it. 9% do not believe in God, and 12% aren't sure. And weirdly, not everyone who calls himself or herself a Christian or a Jew actually believes in God. Here's a breakdown of some demographics. 84% of women believe in God compared to 73% of men. 87% of Republicans compared to 78% of Democrats and 75% of independents. Interesting.
Yes, and 70% of Americans are broken down by age and sex.
Badly broken down.
What are the rest of them?
We're broken. We're just... There's a point of no return. We're just broken.
Still, everybody thinks of Democrats as the godless party, but they're actually less likely to not believe in God than independents, it seems.
Yeah.
And finally, and this is a useful statistic, 82% of those with no college education believe in God, but only 73% who did go to college do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Are these very recent figures?
Well, the story is pretty recent.
Okay. I was wondering just how recent was this particular Harris survey?
Well, I wish I'd gotten that. Of course, you guys, now that I have the awesome wireless internet in my house.
Yeah, which we were just playing with on your PDA, and it was like loading,
baby. Yeah. Technology.
Just loading full websites.
Invented by science, not religion.
Yes. Oh, you didn't pray for that thing. It just and have it turn up as if by magic? I'm disappointed now. You've shattered all my precious illusions.
Yeah, well, like the comedian Emo Phillips once said, when I was young, I used to pray for a bicycle every day, but then I realized that God in His infinite wisdom doesn't work that way, so I stole one and asked Him to forgive me.
I have something here when you're done that is an article that can segue right into that one.
Okay.
Because it's of a very similar nature.
But, isn't it odd? I can understand sort of... I can certainly understand Jews who don't entirely consider Jewishness a religion.
Yeah, because that's more of a cultural and an ethnic oriented
But,
thing.
Can you really consider yourself a Christian, especially a Protestant one, if you... don't believe in God?
I would think most Christians would say no.
Of course.
But Bertrand Russell in Why I'm Not a Christian. One of his introductory paragraphs to that essay, he talks about, well, first we have to talk about what we mean by that term.
Right.
And if you simply are referring to some of the humanitarian teachings of Jesus, love one another, etc., and we should all be good and nice and kind and considerate and what have you, and that's what it means to be a Christian, then sure, he'd be happy to be called a Christian. Well, but if you want to talk, if being a Christian requires these rigid sectarian supernatural beliefs about death and the afterlife and heaven and hell and sin and redemption and angels and all of the supernaturalism, well, then no, he doesn't.
Well, yeah, that's a good point.
But I think most Christians...
there's that often abused quote by Thomas Jefferson, where Jefferson actually said, I think, I am a Christian, something like, in the truest sense of the word. And
he was a Jesus fan, but he didn't believe that Jesus was God incarnate or anything like that.
Yeah, that was the whole point of the Jefferson Bible, right?
The Jefferson Bible.
Removed all of the miracles and the resurrection, the supernatural stuff, and just focused on what he thought was the important thing, which was Jesus's humane teachings.
Right. What he thought was the plausible thing, because about
Jesus
that time,
was born, and it ended with, and they rolled the stone over the tomb.
Yeah.
And just kind of skipped all the other stuff in the middle about walking on water and funny stuff like that. And it's a very short book.
Yeah. Maybe doesn't sell it quite as well as the original in terms of, being good Hollywood, but,
probably isn't as much of a money machine as Mel Gibson's movie is going to be.
Well, there's some debate about that, too. But that's another thing that I forgot I could talk about. While you guys are doing one of your things, I can download that information. But I have this article.
We already did the story where Jim Caviezel was struck by lightning.
Yeah. Now, this is more recent. Apparently, some folks have who were not handpicked by Gibson to view the film have since seen a rough cut of it. And have offered some widely different opinions as to just precisely how anti-Semitic it may or may not be.
Oh.
And
did they mention whether it was crappy or not?
In terms of artistic merits, they weren't really concentrating on that more than as much as they were, what is really generating the controversy about the film, which is this movie overtly anti-Semitic? I think from the trailer that I've seen, I'm sure that artistically it's going to be a stunning movie.
I have not seen the trailer.
Trailer's been up on several websites.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Looks gorgeous. Certainly the bloodiest Jesus movie ever. I mean, this thing will not escape with any...
The Peck and Paw Bible?
Jesus looks like a piece of raw meat, when they get done with him. I mean, he's really, there's more splatter in this than all 10 Friday the 13th put together. And just in terms of, and that was actually one criticism that some of the more recent, the people who, the New York Post apparently got a tape of a rough cut of the film. And of course, Gibson's people are crying foul. But one of the Christian scholars who has seen it, has criticized it on the basis that it concentrates so much on the brutality that you don't get a feel for what Jesus really, what he did and why this is important and why he is is Jesus, right?
Well, people don't like to talk about it, but it really is a very brutal and disgusting concept to base religion off of.
Yeah.
You've seen those shirts, like what Arlo brings sometimes.
Yeah. Oh.
Where you've got Jesus with the crown of
His
thorns.
blood's for you. Yeah.
And it's dripping blood down, and it's pretty gross.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you got to keep this in perspective, right? Because basically, lots of people got crucified. Most of them didn't get to be king of the universe forever after that, right? And he suffered for 6 hours on the cross, which that does bite. But I know people who suffered more than that. And
on a cross,
right? And he's supposed to have died for our sins, right? And you divide 6 hours by 30 billion people who've ever lived, and he was on the cross for me for less than a microsecond. So I'm not actually all that grateful. So that's why they got to pump up the gore and the misery and stuff, because they're really way behind on basically him suffering for our sins, and they got to show the movie a zillion times to catch up.
Right. Of course, if they showed the movie a zillion times, I think that would
inflict enough more suffering.
Oh boy. So
I'm finding that.
Okay.
So you can.
All right. So we've got some more good news this week. Of course, every time a story about Roy Moore comes up on the show, I always say, well, looks like he's done for this time. It can't get any worse for him, and I guess we don't need to talk about him anymore. But what was the date of this? November 13th. Alabama's Judicial Ethics Panel removed Chief Justice Roy Moore from office Thursday for defying a federal judge's order to move a Ten Commandments monument from the state Supreme Court building. The 9-member Court of the Judiciary issued its unanimous decision after a one-day trial Wednesday. Not only did they remove him from office, they didn't have to think real hard enough. The panel, which includes judges, lawyers, and non-lawyers, could have reprimanded Moore, continued his suspension, or cleared him. The ethics panel said Moore put himself above the law by willfully and publicly flouting the order to remove the 2.6-ton monument from the state judicial building's rotunda in August. Moore showed no signs of contrition for his actions, the Court of the Judiciary found. Of course not. He's proud of it.
Right. He thinks he's a martyr.
Yep. Moore's critics said they were not yet satisfied. Richard Cohen, a lawyer for the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the groups that sued Moore over the monument, said the organization would seek to have Moore disbarred.
Wow, yeah, that's probably the next step.
Not be a lawyer, but he can't practice law ever again.
And he is going to parlay this quote martyrdom of his into a run for the governor's office, which I think is some people.
Has he announced that? Is that what he's?
I don't know that he's announced that, but just about everyone is predicting it.
He did declare that he was going to make a big announcement, but I think the date by which he said he was going to do it has already come and gone.
Huh. Maybe he made it. No, there were no cameras there. No one was paying.
Well, he went to.
What if you're a religious
and
demagogue?
Said, I'm thinking of running for government, and they all said, "Oh God, that's a horrible idea."
Yeah. What if some annoying religious demagogue held a press conference and no one came? Anyway, I'm going to.
So we were actually talking about this when we met on Wednesday, and Jeff Jones seemed to have an even better idea than Roy Moore running for governor, which was, what if he ran for president as an independent candidate against the other guys?
And he ended up being like a Nader-esque Bush spoiler?
That would be awesome.
It would be interesting.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, because he would suck off all of the
so to speak
plenty votes. Okay, well that's a different story.
Different kind of pandering.
No Roy Moy's sucking off imagery, please. Thou shalt not.
But he would drain off all of all of George Bush's fundamentalist vote, and that would be fabulous.
A lot of it. Yeah. You would, as long
well, thanks for softening that, because I was afraid we lost all the uptight people.
Stop that.
Sorry.
Of course he wouldn't win. But I think he might just be crazy enough to do it, and that would be terrific.
And I think people might be crazy enough to vote for him. That's the scary thing.
Yeah, of course a lot of people would vote for him, but I don't think he would win.
Well, maybe not president, but who knows what would happen there.
He could be appointed to something afterwards as a consolation prize. That would be scary. But personally, I'm all for a presidential campaign, and if you guys could out there, send him a little encouraging note and some money, because I think this would be one of the best things that could possibly happen.
Roy Moore for spoiler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now about this article.
Oh well, here's just one of them. There were 5 people had an opportunity to see this rough cut of The Passion of the Christ, which is what Gibson is now calling his movie. And here is just from one of them. Robert Levine is a rabbi, senior rabbi, congregation Rodef Shalom, Vice President, New York Board of Rabbis. One-word review: appalling. Portrayal of Jews: painful. Recommendation: I hope no one goes to see it. Message to Gibson: if he was trying to help people understand Christ's passion, his movie doesn't succeed. There's too much violence and no real examination of the meaning of Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection. Goes on to say, Rabbi Robert Levine would have walked out halfway through Mel Gibson's The Passion of Christ if he hadn't agreed to be part of the post-screening panel. I was not prepared for this kind of movie, he said. Not knowing what Mel Gibson's motives are, my visceral reaction was that this is a hateful treatment of Jews. It hurt me as a Jew to watch it, he said. It was the most appalling depiction of Jews in a film in my recollection. It was painful and inaccurate. If Gibson was trying to help people understand Christ's passion, just read that bit, his movie doesn't succeed. There's too much violence and no real examination of the meaning of Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection.
Well, I think that's partly because there is no meaning to it. It makes absolutely no sense for somebody to die for somebody else's sins.
Oh, well, of course, yeah. But, be that as it may, he says, he noted that the movie consistently depicted the Romans as rational and groping for justice, while it consistently portrayed Jews as cruel, sadistic, and inattentive to matters of justice and common decency.
Well, is that authentic? I mean, if you're going with the Gospel of John, is that the one that is the most anti-Semitic? I'm thinking it is. It's the one.
That's the one where Caiaphas is the Jewish, he's the Pharisee who is.
One of the Gospels was written after 70 A.D., after the fall of the Second Temple,
I think that was
when
John.
It was no longer cool to be a Jew, because the Romans had stomped them good, and they'd had a revolution, and they'd failed. And so I believe that's the Gospel that is pretty seriously anti-Semitic, that the earlier Gospels present Christians as being Jews who know this extra thing. And that gospel says, oh, we're not Jews, we're Christians, because it was just politically incorrect to be a Jew at that time. So,
Martin, that's very loud when you do that. I'm very sorry. Anyway. Yeah, well, I was going to comment on what you were talking about, but I'm not paying enough attention. Okay, I'm sorry, I distracted everyone with moving around. But
Here's another review. Elizabeth Castelli. Can I be heard?
My microphone hasn't been working too well. I apologize for that,
we're having
folks.
Technical difficulties, folks.
Anyway,
okay, that's what happens when you leave the producer to also be the host.
You're doing great.
Okay, it's working now.
Elizabeth Castelli, professor of religion, Barnard College, senior research scholar at NYU Center for Religion and Media. Her one-word review of Mel Gibson's movie, Violence. Portrayal of Jews, unfair. They're based on medieval stereotypes that have a history of inspiring violence against Jews. Recommendation, no. Nor would I recommend censoring it. Goes on to say, Professor Elizabeth Castelli. Am I through?
Now.
Can you do that again?
Was I not being heard at all?
Not really.
Okay. now. How about that?
Yeah, much better.
We're so professional here. Anyway, Elizabeth Castelli, she is, this is another one of the reviews, professor of religion, Barnard College, senior research scholar, NYU Center for Religion and Media. Now remember, these are, Gibson's production team is crying foul because these people got this early cut of this film to watch. Her review, one-word review of the movie, violent, portrayal of Jews unfair. They're based on medieval stereotypes that have a history of inspiring violence against Jews. Recommendation, no, nor would I recommend censoring it. Goes on to say, Professor Elizabeth Castelli found the violence disturbing and the story of Christ's passion distorted in Mel Gibson's account of the last 12 hours of Jesus' life. The violence went on, said Castelli. As a student of gospel tradition, she was, quote, distressed about what was added. Gibson took bits and pieces from different gospels, blended them, and added narratives to flesh out the story. The film mixes legend with the Gospels and distorts the story of the Passions, she said. Jews are not fairly portrayed, especially the Jewish leadership. Their portrayal is unhistorical and drew upon medieval stereotypes that have a history of inspiring violence against Jews.
I've read a Jewish perspective on the four Gospels, and one of the things they say is that, I think this is actually what you were talking about a minute ago, Paul. The Gospel of John was actually very deliberately, it seems to have been very deliberately set out to slander the Jews. Yeah. And in fact, not only do the Jews appear as bloodthirsty maniacs in the book of John, but they also say something real specific along the lines of, they ask him, are you guys sure you want us to crucify this guy? And right. And they say, yeah, not only are we sure, we want his blood to be on our heads and the heads of all our children and our children's children.
Wow.
So, which is a little revisionist history that happened after 70 AD that basically they decided, the Christians decided, we won't call ourselves Jews anymore. We're going to be our own thing because it's no longer cool to be a Jew. And we'll blame the Jews for the bad stuff. And we'll rewrite history. In this new gospel, we'll insert stuff that says, they asked for it. They just literally asked for it.
Right.
Crazy.
And part of the reason they're so, set on doing that is because Jesus was supposed to be the king of the Jews. So, if the Jews don't accept them, then shit, we got nothing here. We better do something to make them look like they're deluded.
Wow. Boy, I'll just read one last one.
So, I'm not sure it's that inaccurate. Maybe this is the most accurate.
Right. I think
the issue is, of course, that no one will know for sure. We do know of the whole tortured history of the writing and rewriting and the politically motivated, perspectives that went into the writings of these Gospels. And what people don't
seem to be saying in talking about the movie is that
it's not giving us the preferred version of Jesus that we want.
There may be some extra stuff that's medieval that's put in there, but it is consistent with some things that are actually in the scriptures that actually do blame the Jews.
But Gibson's been accused of
an anti-Semitic thing going on.
Using the writings of this medieval woman named Anne Catherine Emmerich, who wrote a lengthy piece that you can actually find online. I Googled it and found it, and it's this long, very anti-Semitic treatment a treatise, where she refers to the Jews as the perverse murderers of our Lord and things like that. And and again, Gibson is this kind of traditional. He's an old school Catholic. He's pre-Vatican II. He's donated money to build a Catholic church in his neighborhood in California that is going to have traditional masses in Latin and all the rest of it. And his father is a fucking Holocaust denier.
Are you sure when you say traditional Christian, you don't mean like pre-Renaissance?
Well, yeah, probably mean that.
Some people may not know what pre-Vatican II means. Basically, when I was a baby, there was the Second Vatican Conference, and this is like the second one in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
So been in like 1962 or something?
Something like that. 62 or 63, I think it was.
Right.
And basically they said, the Catholic Church is a little too fascistic and authoritarian, and that's not making us real popular. So
plus they got this thing called science now, and that's making us look like morons.
Right. And so this was an enormously important event in the history of the Catholic Church, where the Catholic Church basically decided not to be so reactionary anymore, not to do masses in Latin so that they sounded cool but nobody could understand what they said. Most masses are now said in the native language. and a bunch of other reforms, which a bunch of old hardliners didn't like. That they liked their blue smoke and mirrors and their traditional nonsense.
And their
what you're saying is that Mel Gibson is one of those people who wishes for the good old days before Vatican II.
Yeah. I'll read one last one, and just in case you're just now tuning in, these are we've been talking about Mel Gibson's movie, and it's all about the New York Post got their hands on a rough cut of the film Passion of Christ. It's scheduled for a February 25th release in the U.S. and around the world. It's picked up by New Market, which is a pretty savvy independent distributor. They handled Memento and several other high-profile independent.
Excellent movies.
Yeah. But they
going downhill.
Yeah.
But of course, on people's Gibson's people are crying foul that this rough cut got out, but it shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Anyway, the last review.
Somehow I'm not quite as upset about that as the Half-Life 2 source code leaking out.
Delaying the game.
Are they giving away the ending?
Oh no!
Yeah, apparently Trinity dies. So. Oh no! Since we're on the subject of Jesus movies.
You better not have just spoiled The Matrix for me.
You don't want to see it anyway, trust me.
Oh.
Last guy, Mark Hallinan, is priest, St. Ignatius Loyola Catholic Church staff, New York, Province of the Society of Jesus. His one-word review: unhelpful portrayal of Jews, very bad. I don't think the intent was anti-Semitic, but Jews are unfairly portrayed. His recommendation: don't go to see it. Mel Gibson's biblical epic, quote, exaggerates the bloodiness of Christ's death, but he doesn't tell you why he died. It doesn't touch on the values that he represented and that continue to be a positive force in the world today. Hallinan was especially disturbed at the film's portrayal of Jews as a bloodthirsty rabble, and at how they were so sharply contrasted to the Romans, who consistently came off as thoughtful and reflective, particularly Pontius Pilate. He recalled one sequence at Golgotha during the crucifixion that, quote, shows the Jewish high priest, I guess that would be Caiaphas, looking with contempt at Jesus, and a Roman soldier looking at the priest and wondering, how could you do this? Hallinan added, unsophisticated people viewing the film will see Jews as cold, heartless people.
I think that's the way that they were actually portrayed in some of the Gospels, and I think that portraying the story of Jesus as extremely bloody doesn't overstate the case. So, this is kind of a question of whether you want the movie to have mass appeal or whether you want it to be true to the book.
Well, here's one. Hallinan also questioned the depiction during the crucifixion of Gestas, the bad thief, having his eyes plucked out by a crow after he questions Christ's divinity.
Ooh. What's this movie rated?
It's going to get a hard R at the very least. I mean, they won't. He won't want an NC-17 for it.
I'm going to wait for the X-rated remake.
Yeah, but anyway, so it's interesting, giving a different perspective. But maybe you guys are right. What Gibson is doing is presenting a more traditionally accurate vision of what the intent of the Gospels were.
Yeah, and he's not doing it to make the Bible look bad, but that's going to be the ultimate effect of it.
He's just fleshing it out with narrative and blood.
Like if you were to think about it,
it's like Butch Cassidy,
Or Fred Phelps, right? I mean, his attitude toward gays is scriptural.
Pretty biblical,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, but when people don't like to have the really disturbing and uncomfortable aspects of the belief system brought to light in such a brazen manner. Noise alert.
Okay. Oh, I could have actually turned off that microphone when we were doing that, but too late.
It's interesting sort of behind the scenes.
Taking up airtime with it.
Yeah, kind of gives the listener you are there kind of.
Jeff always tells me, don't be ashamed that we sound amateur, because we are amateurs. We're just some guys who are doing this show to a pretty good number of listeners.
Yeah.
You are there.
We're having fun. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see.
Oh, can I do this thing? Just because it pertains to the first article you read.
Sure.
You were talking about facts and figures and who believes what and whatnot. This weekly news magazine called The Economist. It comes out, I've been buying it to send to my dad because he doesn't get it up where he lives. And
The Economist. That's a British.
Yeah.
No, yes, it comes from England.
Yeah.
And where they have much better reporting than we do here these days.
And they're not all beholden to corporate, special interests and what have you. and don't feel the need to toe any kind of party line. But this issue, I guess it's now last week's issue, November 8th to 14th. It's the cover story is a special issue on America.
They all hate him over there. George Bush was over there this last week, and there were huge protests in the street, and they had to put
burning
tons of guys on security detail just to shield Bush from actually even seeing that. I think.
Good grief!
That's
Bush
doesn't want to know that he's unpopular.
Yeah, keep the just keep the man sheltered from any But this is what's interesting. In the cover, it has this thumbs down, thumb giving a thumbs down signal with the greatest danger or greatest hope is the cover of the headline. Centered, prior to, say what you will about Clinton or Bush 1 or Reagan or Ford or even freaking Nixon, right? But I don't think that prior to this current administration you would have ever heard anyone except for, real radicals off in some, dust-blown country somewhere using the phrase greatest danger to refer to the U.S. I mean, this is an alarmingly new phenomenon.
Well, I read something this week where it was about the new Bush ad that's being run by the Republican National Convention.
Okay.
And it says that I seem to remember a line where it said that you should support our policy of preemptive self-defense. Now, that's an Orwell term if I ever heard one.
Wow.
Just think about that for a minute.
Yeah. You could justify anything with that.
It wasn't murder, Your Honor. It was preemptive self-defense.
He was looking at me. Didn't like the way he was looking at me funny. Anyway, one of the articles in here was a whole special section, Survey of America. It's about the religious climate in America today. Therapy of the masses. To Europeans, I'm just going to read some selected passages. To Europeans, religion is the strangest and most disturbing feature of American exceptionalism. They worry that fundamentalists are hijacking the country. I think they worry on good grounds. They find it extraordinary that 3 times as many Americans believe in the virgin birth as an evolution. They fear that America will go on a crusade, a term briefly used by Mr. Bush himself, in the Muslim world, or cut aid to poor countries lest it be used for birth control. The persistence of religion as a public force is all the more puzzling because it seems to run counter to historical trends. Like the philosophers of the Enlightenment, many Europeans argue that modernization is the enemy of religion. As countries get richer, organized religion will decline. Secular Europe seems to fit that pattern. America does not. Goes on... there is some evidence that private belief is becoming more intense. The Pew Research Center reported that the number of those who, quote, agree strongly with 3 articles of faith, belief in God, in Judgment Day, and in the importance of prayer in daily life rose by 7 to 10 points in 1965 to 2003. In the late 1980s, 2/5 of Protestants described themselves as born again. Now the figure is over half. These shifts, and it discusses some more shifts in the poll numbers, and then it goes on to say...
That's interesting because I heard at one point that over half of all Americans in general call themselves evangelicals now. So
kind of seems
now
to
it's over half of Protestants who are not even over half of the country.
Yeah. Anyway, it goes on to say these shifts in opinion have given a boost to one particular group of churches, evangelical Protestants. They embrace a variety of denominations, including Baptist, confessional, and Pentecostal churches, all of which stress individual salvation in the Word of the Bible, rather than sacraments or established doctrine. And, in 1987, they were the 3rd largest religious group in America, with a membership of 24% of the adult population. Now they are the largest with 30%. And it talks a bit more about just some of their shenanigans and activities, but then there's an interesting little bit here towards the end, where it says, lastly, although the number and membership of charismatic churches has certainly grown, there has been an offsetting increase in those who describe themselves as of no religion at all. Since 1960, the number of self-described secularists, atheists, agnostics, and those not affiliated to any organized religion has roughly doubled. According to a survey by the City University of New York, 14% of Americans between 18 and 34 describe themselves as secular, and a further 9% as somewhat secular, whatever that means.
Somewhat.
Yeah, and then here's some stuff to kind of shore up what you were mentioning in your article, Russell.
Yeah.
Secularists are more likely to live on the Pacific Coast or in the Northeast, in a city, have a college degree, be male, single, and either lean towards the Democrats or be politically independent. Committed evangelicals are more likely to live in the South, vote Republican, lack a college degree, live in towns or rural areas, and be female and married. In other words, America looks like two tribes, one religious and one secular. But the really distinctive feature of American religion is the area in the middle. Most Americans do not become members of a church to sign up for a crusade or to sit in judgment on miserable sinners. For them, church-going is a matter of personal belief, not conservative activism. Their religion is mild.
Right, which is why I would argue that there are so many people who call them Christians but don't believe in the God stuff.
Yeah.
Because they just want the social thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Guys, the solution is to form your own atheist group.
Can I give a little historical background on this?
I
mean, people all over the world think American Christianity is a very weird and scary thing. And
so do I.
There was
people in America.
A book published in 1963, a really classic sociological book, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life by Richard Hofstadter, that explains how American religion got to be the way it is and so different from religion in Europe. And what happened was, as the frontier was being settled, and this happened over and over again as the frontier moved west from the eastern seaboard colonies all the way to California, that as the frontier was being settled, basically there were no preachers. So in Europe, in general, Europe has been densely settled for thousands of years, relatively densely settled, relatively developed. And you have these old churches there that have a lot of infrastructure. They have the economic basis and the facilities to educate priests. So like the Catholic Church has seminaries where priests are educated people. And when the Catholic Church missionizes, they send educated priests to do it. But
of course, in like medieval times, the priest class were practically the only people who were educated.
Right. And this actually has a lot to do with the difference between liberal theology and conservative and fundamentalist theology today in America.
You mean conservatives being the uneducated one?
Exactly. That there's a long history of this, that for 100 years as the frontier moved west, people would be settling the frontier, but the mainline churches didn't send enough preachers. They didn't start a Catholic church. They didn't start an Episcopalian church. Episcopalian is just Anglican in America, right? It's the American version of the Anglican Church, the Church of England. And so the established churches, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians, and the Catholics from Europe basically didn't get on the ball. And what would happen is that the people settling the frontier, who were largely a bunch of ignorant crackers, would say, well, somebody's got to preach, and somebody would feel the call and say, well, I got my Bible, I'll just stand up and start preaching, and I'll just be a preacher without any particular education. And when they did this, they would basically start their own churches. And the two churches that just exploded in America that were not a big deal in England, but became hugely, hugely popular here were the Baptists and the Methodists.
Methodists.
And both of these churches, for the 100 years that the frontier moved west...
I thought the Methodists were typically considered a more liberal...
They're more liberal than the Baptists, but there's actually... That's
more liberal than the...
Well, also, there's different kinds of Methodists and there's different kinds of Baptists. But both of them developed as churches that did not have a priest class, basically. They didn't have an educated clergy.
That's right. It was just, Brother Joe and, you know.
And so you got your barefoot Baptist preachers.
Well, you listen to the radio around here, and you can sure tell that influence.
Right, and you have your horseback Methodist preachers. One of the reasons why Methodism was really successful in America is to make good use of the preachers that they had. They put them on horses, and they were circuit riders. And so, there's a quote from Twain in one of Twain's books. Somebody's talking about how horrible the weather is. It's just a god-awful night out there. There's, nothing out there except wolves and Methodist preachers. Because the Methodist preachers would ride the circuit, through snow and rain and fog and all that.
You guys in the chat room seem to be having a fascinating discussion about the afterlife. I wish I could get in on that. And hold down this, listen to this stuff with Paul, too.
But I will continue.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that happened over and over and over again as the frontier moved west is that these backwoods preachers would feel the call, start preaching, and then whatever area they were in would get more and more densely settled.
Mm-hmm.
And when when it was settled enough and the economy picked up enough that it could afford a Catholic church or an Episcopalian church or whatever, the Catholics or the Episcopalians would send in a priest and a couple of nuns or whatever, and they'd start these churches. And the local guys were saying, "What the hell are you doing poaching my flock?"
Oh.
So over and over again, this
we don't
pattern
need you,
recurs.
highfalutin
Right.
city
We
types.
don't need you,
Get off
damn
my
city
property.
slickers with your highfalutin college educations coming and stealing my good Christian flock. And so there was this incredible pattern of resentment that built up between the Barefoot Baptists and the Horseback Methodists of the Catholics and the Lutherans and the Episcopalians who would come and try and poach their flocks and tell these people that they needed to hear from, the higher structure of those churches.
Wow.
And
so it's kind of amazing that geographical differences that developed because there wasn't widespread travel and communication back then would actually continue now, even in the time of airline travel and the internet.
Right. They have a massive effect. They set this pattern of skepticism of learning. Skepticism of educated people are scary to uneducated people.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you look at the Anglican Church, one of the things that's interesting about the Anglican Church is basically all Anglican ministers for a long, 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 long time have gone to college at Oxford or Cambridge. Right? Which accounts for why there's a fair fraction of Anglican.
Look at Mr. Fancy Pants with the Cambridge degree.
Right, that's why
you're so smart.
Right? Well, and actually a lot of them are. And
well, you kind of have to be to go to those.
Right, exactly. And
stuffy
get through
places,
them.
yeah.
And so that accounts for why a fair percentage of Anglican priests are atheists or agnostics. Because you go to Oxford or Cambridge and you hang out with evolutionary biologists and nuclear physicists, and, Francis Crick went there, did that work there and stuff like that, that it's really hard to be a backwoods cracker who believes in the literal truth of Genesis when you've gone to a real good school.
Yeah, you get filled with all that education
So when you come right down to it, their paranoia of education is actually justified, because the more educated you are, the more likely you are to ditch this whole belief.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, the less, the more you know about how the world works, the less you have recourse to supernatural beliefs as an explanation for stuff.
Right. And
you just don't need that anymore.
For decades, the Baptists and the Methodists didn't have seminaries.
Mm-hmm.
And the various kinds of barefoot Protestants in America didn't have seminaries because they saw seminaries as sources of intellectual corruption. That it was citified learning where you don't believe in the literal truth of the Bible anymore, and you'll turn into one of those evil city people who isn't a good fundamentalist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we have what's called Bible colleges. What's the difference between a Bible college and a seminary? A Bible college is a seminary for churches that don't have seminaries as a matter of dogma because seminaries are evil.
Are we talking about unaccredited schools like American Patriot University?
I'm not real clear on the exact accreditation status, but I think that Bible colleges can be accredited and recognized by this Association of Bible Colleges. They have their own accrediting body. But I think actually in general educational terms they may be accepted accreditations.
Just like creationists have their own journals which are peer reviewed by each other.
I think it may not be that bad, or is in some sense worse, in that those accrediting bodies I think probably are recognized by the Department of Education for getting loans and things, and they probably have certain standards of teaching physics or whatever that are okay. But the funny thing is, a Bible college is a seminary for people who don't read books. They only read one book.
Yeah, it's a seminary. It's just, it's Bible.
You hear all the time fundamentalists talking about how can you tell stuff in the Bible, that something is biblical? Well, you use Scripture to interpret Scripture. The book interprets itself.
Very convenient.
Yeah.
This difference in the structure of American religion vis-a-vis European religion is actually noted in this Economist article.
And hanging out, I've worked in Scotland and hung out with a lot of Europeans and had interesting discussions about this. Every time I run into them, they talk about the latest wacky stuff in America.
Just like we do.
Right. And one of the places where there is a certain substantial streak of fundamentalism, like nowhere in Europe, is Australia. And I think that's partly for similar reasons, same kind of pattern, that it was a frontier kind of place, this huge place where only poor people went, because there were a bunch of convicts.
But there's also the aspect of, having state religions versus not having them.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing...
Point on, well, hang on. I just want to mention, this is a very interesting point. This is Alan Wolf of the Boise Institute for the Study of Religion at Boston College points out that American religion is exceptional in two senses. Not only are Americans more religious than Europeans, but they have no national church. Right. Thanks to the separation of church and state, the country has nothing comparable to, say, the Catholic churches of Italy and Spain or the Church of England. Americans are members of sects. The two kinds of religious exceptionalism are connected. Rather, as in the economic sphere, competing private companies tend to produce wealth and activity because you have all that competition. So in the whereas monopoly firms have the opposite effect, stifles that. So in the religious sphere, competing sects generate a ferment of activity and increased levels of belief, whereas state churches produce indifference. Right. This has implications for the quality of American belief. Churches come and go with astonishing speed. The statisticians of American religious
just recently, the Episcopal Church split in two, right?
Right. Churches in America mutate wildly, which allows them to fill a lot of niches where people might not be satisfied with this sect or that sect, the state religion in, say, Sweden.
Get a load of this. The statisticians of American religious bodies tracked 187 denominations, and there were many more between 1990 and 2000.
Sure.
In that time, 37 disappeared and 54 new ones appeared on the scene.
And they breed like rabbits.
Yeah. And one study...
They don't believe in abortion or birth control.
One study found that half the pastors of so-called megachurches have moved from another denomination. These people bounce back and forth. It's buffet religion.
Right, exactly. Roll your own religion.
Interesting article in The Economist.
Don't like our theology? Well, drop the parts you don't like. Start your own church.
By the way, speaking of the Episcopalian Church, real quick, I don't normally read other people's comedy much, but there was just something priceless in the Landover Baptist site last month.
Well, there's always something priceless there.
You know how they affirmed the gay bishop, and this has caused a big stink in the Episcopalian Church, and I guess they have actually split off by now, or at least are imminently planning to do so.
But I haven't
they're planning to do
certainly, the African Episcopalian,
Anglicans are pissed.
Right.
Upset.
The actions taken by the New Hampshire Episcopalians are an affront to Christians everywhere, declared Mrs. Betty Bowers, America's best Christian.
TM.
I am just thankful that the church's founder, Henry VIII, and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, his wife, Anne Boleyn, his wife, Jane Seymour, his wife, Anne of Cleves, his wife, Catherine Howard, and his wife, Catherine Parr, are no longer here to suffer through this assault on our traditional Christian marriage.
They killed all of them.
Which connects with what I was about to say. Which is, there's another thing about why people in Europe tend to be more skeptical of religion. They may be religious, but they're not fanatical about it and not fundamentalists. And they do not have the same kind of tendencies that Americans have. Of a lot, or not as many of them as stronger tendencies to get government and religion in bed together, because obviously government should help religion. And the reason why is they've seen what happens when you do that. So exactly in the Anglican Church, the Church of England, the Church of England was started so that Henry VIII could get a divorce and marry all those women and kill them and stuff. And what happened was that the church and the state got too mixed up, and this wasn't just bad for the state, it was also bad for the church. When there's that much government money in the church ends up being a sinecure for rich kids. The third sons of the noble families go into the church, and they get these cushy jobs. They get to go to college, and they get cushy jobs, and it's all part of the machine that keeps the poor people poor and the rich people rich. And so the Anglicans have been cynical about their own church for hundreds and hundreds of years, with good reason. And that's also true of the Lutherans in Germany and various other the Presbyterians in Scotland, that there is this indigenous skepticism of religion, this indigenous skepticism of the judgment of the clergy, because all of these people have hundreds and hundreds of years of experience seeing the clergy get power and screw things up for everybody. Where in America, people, like Falwell want Christians to take power, and it's like, we've seen Christians take power before. We didn't like it. Go ask the European Christians.
So, bottom line, would we be better off if we just backed off on this whole separation of church and state thing?
Well, I think we'd be worse off for 200 or 300 years, and then people would learn their lesson.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't help us.
Wouldn't help us right now, yeah.
It would suck for a while,
Yeah,
I think.
it would suck for just a bit.
Well, we'd all have to move to England, and then it would be overcrowded there, so better not to.
Or Canada, even.
Yeah.
So
is that all for that article?
For my thing, yeah.
Okay.
So, which is interesting because it seemed to tie in very directly to that first article you read in many particulars.
Right. And speaking of destroying traditional Christian marriage, Massachusetts court rules ban on gay marriage unconstitutional. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court has cleared the way for lesbian and gay couples in the state to marry, ruling Tuesday that government attorneys failed to identify any constitutionally adequate reason to deny them that right. In a 4-3 ruling, the court gave the Massachusetts state legislature 6 months to rewrite the state's marriage laws for the benefit of gay couples. The ruling by the court on the Massachusetts Constitution could set new legal ground and drew quick reaction from advocates on both sides of the issue. Massachusetts governor immediately denounced Tuesday's decision and said he would work for a constitutional amendment to overturn it. But an openly gay U.S. congressman from the state said the amendment couldn't come before the voters until after 2006, and by that time the same-sex marriages will be law. So there goes another state that has abandoned the idiot prejudice.
Well, and you just
I'm afraid of the backlash on this one.
George Bush doesn't like that.
Gee,
I'm shocked. I'm simply shocked.
Yeah.
Marriage is a sacred
Dick
institution.
Cheney does, though. His daughter's a lesbian.
No, that's Cheney.
That's what I said.
You just said that.
Okay.
Yeah, that Cheney's basically saying, I don't think we should really be cracking down on these gays so much. Because his daughter's a lesbian.
But didn't they sort of like keep her out of the line of sight of cameras like at the last big Republican convention?
I don't think Cheney's doing a high profile thing on this, but when pressed, he's saying, I'm not so much for cracking down on gays.
Yeah, let's get back to like Halliburton and making money in the Middle East and stuff.
We've got economic corruption to deal with and promote.
So here's Bush. Marriage is a sacred institution between a man and a woman.
Well, now let's deal with that for a second now. I mean, the whole sacred institution
and the whole man and a woman thing, which is a biblical thing, which the fundamentalists recognize, and they do not realize the biblical significance of that. That's a quote from Jesus.
What?
That the thing about marriage being a thing between a man and a woman.
And the woman being the head.
This is the kind of thing that the Bush speechwriters work into his speeches all the time, where if you are not familiar enough with the Bible, especially the way it's read by fundamentalists, you don't know that they're putting code phrases in there.
You mean because the man has dominion over the woman?
Well, the thing is, there's I wish I could remember the exact quote and which gospel it's from, but Jesus is asked about monogamy and polygamy, basically. And he says, marriage should be between a man and a woman. And a lot of people take that these days completely out of context to mean it shouldn't be between a man or a woman and a woman. But the question that Jesus was being asked, historians think, was probably about polygamy. Because
You mean the question isn't actually in the Bible?
I forget exactly.
Okay.
But the real significance of it, I think, may not be quite explicit. But what's going on there is that there was controversy among Jews then, but not really, because by then Jews had been pretty much monogamous, and that was the cultural norm for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. So 1,000 years before, there'd been these patriarchs with a bunch of wives and concubines having zillions of kids and stuff. But basically, the Jews had become normal Middle Eastern Mediterranean region civilized folks who understood the value of monogamy. Namely, if Solomon gets 700 wives, there's 699 pissed off guys who don't get one.
Yep.
And so one of the things that you have to ask...
Of course, that's biblical. I mean, if it doesn't matter that Jesus countermanded that. If you're going to make a big deal about the Ten Commandments, then the Old Testament counts. And so does the fact that this guy who rose to a very high position of power, thanks to God's help.
Right. These timeless moral values. Mm-hmm. Right. So part of the deal is, forever it has been true that cult leaders tend to pork at all their female followers.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the fringe benefits.
So one of the things that you're going to ask a claimed Messiah is, are you one of those guys who's going to pork all your female followers and generate lots of offspring you're not going to take care of, like a lot of the fundamentalist Mormons do? And
but isn't it interesting that Paul in the 1 Corinthians chapter 7 starts out saying...
You're not near a microphone, Martin.
I'm not? I'm near that one?
It's not pointing at you.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I knew this was in here somewhere, and I finally found it. The first two verses where Paul basically says, okay, it's better for a man not to marry.
Oh, yes.
But since there's so much immorality and corruption in the world, everybody ought to do it just to, stem the tide of that. Every man ought to have a wife.
Better to marry than to burn, right?
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting thing that all the Republican conservative advocates of marriage don't really point out.
Well, a lot of Christian scholars of this kind of thing happen to think that Paul screwed up the Jesus movement, which evolved into the Christian church in a really serious way. Paul was a sick fucker. And he's my namesake, and I'm really quite embarrassed to be named after this guy.
Was he actually? Are you specifically named after him?
Yeah. Oh. My mom's Catholic. Paul is the big hero of the Catholic Church.
Well, of course he is, because he invented the whole damn thing.
But he also had his own weird theology and his own epilepsy on the road to Damascus. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you go back and read Paul, which is the earliest scriptural stuff in the New Testament, he never met Jesus and wasn't really so much hanging out with people who were. And if you read Paul without reference to the other stuff, Jesus is a real different thing.
Well, he meant Jesus' ghost.
But he also was a misogynist and really, really strange about sex. He said things like, my Lord, why have you built your temple next to a sewer? And when he said that, he was referring to men and women. He didn't have the healthiest attitude towards women or sex. He also talked about eunuchs who have made themselves for the kingdom of God's
building your temple
sake.
Next to a sewer, he's not talking about like the nether regions of a woman. Here's the temple, here's the sewer. Sorry.
Well, he also talked about eunuchs who have made themselves
Jeff hasn't been making his tasteless comment for the day lately, so I have to...
Well, I'm working on it, but you won't let me finish.
I'm sorry.
So he talked about eunuchs who have made themselves so for the kingdom of God's sake. And there's a lot of Christian apologists who basically say, well, that's just a metaphor. He was talking about not being too much into sex and letting it, lead you astray and things. But there are actually a fair fraction of historians who seriously study this who think Paul may well have castrated himself. And that he wouldn't have joked about it at that time because there were Eleusinian mystery cults, Roman mystery cults in the region that did exactly that. This was not a joking matter in those days. And Paul was basically largely a Greco-Roman theologian who grafted a lot of Greek metaphysics onto the Jesus myth, and which, substantially warped the whole Christian enterprise and turned into the Catholic Church, and it's all very bad.
Okay.
But yes, indeed, a lot of historians seriously think Paul may have castrated himself.
Wow.
Because sex is bad, and sex with girls is real bad.
Castrating yourself. Just a shudder runs up and down your spine.
Okay.
Wow. But getting back to the whole, the Christian institute, this is a sacred institution, right? I believe I read somewhere that, the church, right? I mean, when it was the church and the only church, it wasn't until something like the 12th century that marriage became this formalized sacrament, right? Something like that. So if this is if this is some sacred institution that God has ordained for men and women and what have you, why was it that his church, his official representatives, on the earth, it took them 12 centuries to formalize it as a sacrament.
Isn't it also the case that it wasn't until pretty damn near the 20th century that love had anything to do with it?
Yeah, it was like business relationships between families and kings. And
that part's not true.
Oh,
that's
well, it depended on your class, right?
Well, actually, I read a book on this subject. I wish I could. I'm racking my brain trying to remember the name of it. The basic thesis in this book is that throughout history, when people have tried to reshape society by various revolutionary means, whether it's the Christian takeover of the Roman Empire or the Bolsheviks taking over Russia or whatever, one of the first things they do is to try to destroy the family. That basically people's family loyalties tend to keep them entrenched in the current status quo kinds of things, that the traditional values. When you want to really dramatically reshape society, you want to destroy the family so that people are vulnerable. And cults do this. Basically, cults systematically get people to separate from their families, isolate people, and only bond with other people in the cult.
Right, and the cult becomes the new family.
And so these movements in general try to destroy the family, whether it's the early Christian church or it's the Russian communists.
Okay.
And then they find out they can't, because the family is a very resilient institution. the nuclear family, pretty much as we know it, actually has been around for a really long time, because in the old days, really, for most of history, until the last few hundred years, Grandma and Grandpa didn't live with the family because the family couldn't afford it.
And they kind of died at a certain
was the most powerful and stable constant in most human cultures forever. And so when you screw around with marriage, you got to expect a real backlash. And marriage has been around forever, and romantic love has been around forever. And these institutions that try to destroy marriage, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Bolsheviks, they do this revisionist history thing, which is very confusing. They go back and say, oh yeah, before we came along, there was no marriage. This is a sacrament that we gave you.
Before Christianity, there were no morals.
We told you how to live, and we sanctify this.
You need us.
If you go back and you look at Catholic parish records from 800 or 1400, then you find out that all through history until the last very few hundred years, most marriages were not consecrated by a priest. That, like, marriage in England was basically two people standing up in a pub saying, we're married now, and other people going, okay. and
then they all
drinks all around.
Hey!
Yeah, hoist the tankard.
Right, and the Catholic Church, was really... People have been marrying each other for tens of thousands of years.
Damn it.
And the Catholic Church keeps trying to deny that fact and keep people from doing that. You can't marry each other. We got to marry you.
It's the same thing,
cut.
Right? It's just like, the established church coming into the rural areas where you've already got Cracker Joe, the barefoot pregnant
and however
priest,
negative it may be for me to talk about a bunch of ignorant barefoot crackers.
Yeah.
Ignorant barefoot crackers are perfectly fine human beings, and they know how to marry each other. They don't need a damn priest to do it, and they've known this for tens of thousands of years.
Ignorant barefoot crackers. Now in sour cream and chives flavor.
and when I say ignorant, I don't mean it in a horribly judgmental way. Most people have been pretty ignorant through most of human history because they didn't get a chance to have a college education. We are of a very lucky generation in a very lucky
You got to admit though that in the instance of marriage, right? Unlike the instance of trying to move into West Bumfuck Podunk and set up the thing and alienating the locals, but in the area of marriage, ultimately the church was successful, right? I mean, they did kind of take that.
You mean the Catholic Church specifically?
I think just the establishment of religion. I mean, because nowadays you can't just get married by standing up in Hooters and saying,
relevant to the thing
I'm married
about gay marriage.
Yeah,
that basically under English common law for the longest time, basically you're married if you say you are. And this is the common law tradition that's still reflected in our common law marriage.
What about like weird things like 3 or 4 people? Does that count?
In general, under common law, in most cultures, most of the time, you can't just go around arbitrarily marrying too many people or goats or something. Because
good, we got to have some standards.
Right.
Horses, maybe, but
because basically, what common law is going to recognize is normal social practice that everybody understands the merits of. So common law is fairly conservative. It says, you're living together, you're saying you're married, you have this commitment to each other, you say so, we're going to hold you to that promise.
Of course, you know what the Christians will say. They only know what marriage is because God set the rules.
Of course they'll say that, and, ask an anthropologist, it just ain't so. I know some people who are anthropologists who work with Stone Age people in the Amazon who didn't know about white people, much less Christianity, until about 15 years ago. So this is one of the last tribes on the planet
lucky bastards
to encounter Western civilization. Within 30 years, there will be no more
and now there's a Walmart down there.
Uncontacted tribes. And these people have marriage. They have traditional nuclear family kinds of structures because it's
But only because God,
put it in their minds.
Right. God
messed with their heads.
Yeah. Right. They're the virtuous pagans like in Dante.
Yeah, right.
They had a premonition of Jesus. That's how they know how to marry each other. Yeah, right.
Which of course always struck me as even more problematic because then, if you're a virtuous pagan, fine, but if somebody tells you about Jesus, it's a little bit too late.
Don't tell me about Jesus. You guys ruined it for me. I could have gone to heaven, or at least one of the more pleasant circles of hell.
Yeah. Let's see.
But I've never understood why they feel threatened. Why they feel that their marriages and their, that the traditional heterosexual nuclear family way of life is in any way threatened. Or has any, by gay people.
That is a good question.
Well, I think it is because the church, like the Communist Party did, the church tries to take over existing naturally occurring social structures and claim that we gave you everything good.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know how to marry each other and raise a family if it wasn't for us.
Right.
You should be really, really grateful to us and give us a cut of everything you make.
It's like stealing all of somebody's possessions and then selling them back to them and expecting them to be grateful.
Right. And human beings all over the world figure out how to marry each other and raise kids and have social commitments and do good stuff, and they don't need any particular religion to do it, and they don't need any religion to do it.
Right.
But churches don't want you to know that because then you won't be grateful to them and give them your stuff.
They're 10%ers.
Yep.
Yep.
Any interesting feedback from the chatters, or are they ignoring us?
I can't really follow it that well when we're talking. I mean, there's
Hi, chatters.
something about a flower and
flower?
the virgin birth and something. No, they are occasionally commenting on the show, so it's all good.
Okay. Hi, chatters. Comment more.
Not that we can pay attention to you. Sorry.
But we keep the chat log, and
yes, we do.
Scream at us, and
Also in the news, conservative religious groups began a petition drive on Monday to demand that Congress legislate to protect displays of the Ten Commandments monument in public buildings. The group's leaders mounted the drive in response to last week's ouster of Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore for his refusal to obey a federal judge's order. We know that. God often does his best work right after a crucifixion. What we saw with Justice Roy Moore was a crucifixion.
See, people are buying into... See, this is what Roy Moore wanted, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like he wants to be Jesus. He wants to be He wants to be this great hero and martyr for God.
I'd be happy to flail him and stab him in the side if that's what he really wants, but not if he wants it that bad.
I've got the crown.
And they love having this whole victim complex, this persecution complex, because it empowers them.
Wine.
Yeah, and they are.
He was a goddamn Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus.
Yeah, it's not like he was this underprivileged, person with no, rights at all. But the crazy thing is, these folks are it's a classic example of not getting it, right? They cannot refuse to make the distinction between displays of religious stuff, in public areas and, things that could actually constitute government endorsement. They don't
like
make the distinction.
Last month we have had this thing about how this company was saying we're gonna drive that ACLU we're gonna drive that ACLU crazy by displaying 10 Commandments signs on all our lawns. Ha ha! That'll teach them.
Yeah,
and it's like. Yeah, and you guys can buy the signs from us, so we can make $1 million by selling you all the signs. And frankly, the ACLU doesn't give a flying fuck about your lawn.
I emailed them. I had a little bit of I had a little bit of a dust up with their webmaster trying to explain these.
Hey, are you going to post that?
I think I may still have some of them in my.
As a card-carrying member of the ACLU,
what this guy
I'm all for that.
But hang on, Paul, as the more he talked, right, this person was a classic paranoid conspiracy theorist. He has bought into all of these paranoid, right-wing fantasies or, nightmares about he's throwing out terms like police state and how, the liberals.
The ACLU wants a police state.
Yeah, how the liberals are trying to, and it's just,
that's what civil liberties means.
Right,
yeah.
right.
And it was just really interesting. It's like this person is living in this bizarre, scary fantasy world where he really thinks everyone's out to get him.
But this is why I'm in favor of all of those people putting those things in their lawn, because I want to know where the paranoid crazies are.
Now maybe if we can get them to stitch little things on their shirt. No.
I think we should tattoo the 10 Commandments on their arms.
That's it.
Joke alert.
But it's amazing the whole the not getting it factor that these people display.
Well, I mean,
they cannot make the distinction between you want to do what you want to do on your own frickin' lawn, go ahead. Nobody cares, and this is about what can be perceived as an unfair government endorsement of one faith over another faith. And I tried in the calmest tone imaginable to explain this to this guy, and he just didn't get it.
Right.
It's
like when the ACLU stood up for the Nazis marching in Skokie, and a lot of people thought that the ACLU was Nazi sympathizers. And it's like,
no.
I really, really think not.
Speaking of them not getting
there's that great Onion parody article. ACLU stands up for neo-Nazis' rights to burn down ACLU headquarters.
That's funny. But, I mean, talking about how they're just not getting it, the thrust of this article I was reading is that what they're doing is getting a petition going to get Congress to legislate something that'll protect these 10 Commandments monuments.
Which is a constitutional issue. They got to have an amendment,
unless I miss my
law.
guess, even if their petition works,
it'll be immediately struck down.
Congress doesn't have the authority to do that because you got like the executive branch, which is Congress, right? Or sorry,
that's legislative. You mean
right?
Executive branch is president.
Congress is the legislative branch, and the Supreme Court is the judicial branch, and if they as are the lower courts in the land. And if the courts say you can't do this, then Congress doesn't get to pass a law that says you can do this. It's just how our government works.
Although Congress with a 3/4 majority
can pass a constitutional amendment, which they're threatening to do.
I do find scary. I don't know how likely it is that they would be able to do that. I'm thinking probably not very, but I wouldn't quite put it past them. I wouldn't put it anywhere near.
Well, and you would still have, federal judges in various federal courts would still have the opportunity to, make rulings, as happened with the recent partial birth abortion thing that Bush signed, and immediately a couple of federal judges put a hold on it and said there are probably constitutional issues with
this. Which I bet was just shocking to him because he thinks that he's the emperor.
Yeah,
he doesn't think he's the president. He thinks he's the emperor.
Nuts.
Again,
what you were dealing with.
Got some nice new duds though.
Yeah. How are we doing on time?
10 minutes.
Oh, for the whole show?
Yeah, we were.
So we didn't really
that time up.
Yeah, didn't talk about much, but we talked much about very little. Yeah. What's left?
What do you got there? A bunch of Muslim stuff, right?
Yeah, Taliban's making a comeback. We're just like we're fucking up in Iraq, we're fucking up in Afghanistan too.
Of course, it was clear that we were fucking up in Afghanistan long before we entered Iraq.
But the thing is, we couldn't. Here's the thing, we couldn't find that annoying Osama bin Laden. We couldn't find that embarrassing Mullah Omar. So we thought, so Bush, I guess, and his pals were like, all right, well, here's a real easy bad guy to capture. So it looks like we're capturing a bad guy because we know where he is. He'll be easy. So we go in, and now we can't find him.
Oh!
Yeah. Found the sons.
Yep, the kids.
But so chaos.
Who were dicks? Yeah. I mean, let's be clear.
Nobody's saying that these are good guys.
But they weren't running the country, so it's.
Well, I mean, it's better to have them dead than alive. But
sure.
Still, but the rationale and all the craziness that we use to justify all this. But we've all been down that road.
But we don't have too good a history of nation building, do we?
No. But anyway, apparently, Taliban's coming back. Last week, the resurgent Taliban began striking into the cities and against heavily armed coalition troops. Their efforts are once again limited to hit-and-run attacks on far-flung government outposts or aid projects and the assassination of moderate clerics. But, the fact that they're able to just be doing this stuff at all is an indication that, the war on terror is is
and I mean, to make this clear, I think we all agree that Taliban is pretty much the worst thing in the world today.
We were slamming them on the TV show long before September 11th. We were pointing out, every week
we were way ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah. But the new Taliban can be split into 4 groups, says this UK Observer article. There's a senior leadership who escaped the war of 2001 are now largely based in Pakistan, are quote-unquote friends over there in Pakistan. Then there are the fighting commanders inside Afghanistan. They, too, have been involved with the Taliban for years. Mm-hmm. Third category are the Taliban fellow travelers, armed tribal bands led by those with their own reason for opposing the new central government. Fourth and most numerous category comprises young foot soldiers who are just, I guess, running around blowing shit up for, Allah. So, it's all,
for the whole family.
These, religious zanies just won't go down easy, that's for sure. And, so certainly got a tiger by the tail with this one. And it's waking back up.
Yep.
So, love this war on terror.
I'm reading a very funny novel right now that I can't go into in detail like I was going to because we're low on time, but it's a science fiction satire called Holy Land, which is a just released guy named Robert Zubrin. And it's basically all about this race of aliens called the Minervans, who invade the town of Kennewick, Washington, because it's their ancient holy land, and move in and basically kick all the locals out. And
Kennewick is the site of something we're supposed to remember, but it's escaping me.
No, it's just
Kennewick, man.
Yeah, it's just the site of So anyway, the fundamentalist Christian presidential administration of the United States appealed to the Western Galactic Empire. And said, look, it's in Western Galactic Empire. It's like, well, we can't really do anything about all this. It's like, yeah, but it's because of your long-term support of the Minervans that the unilateral support that this is all going on in the first place. And the Western Galactic Empire says, okay, well, look, tell you what, we know that you guys are upset about them sort of invading your territory and everything, but what we'll do is, you guys have very large reserves of this incredible natural resource. That's no good to you, but we really need it. So we'll just buy all this stuff from you and give you all this money, and that'll hopefully smooth things over. And so the Americans basically say, okay, I'm fine. And then they take all this alien money, and then they use it to buy stuff to launch suicide attacks against the Minervans and the Western Galactic Empire. And so I'm about two-thirds of the way through the thing, but it's sharp and funny, and cool. Wasn't expecting it. And so you have, the fundamentalists set up these terror training camps in Peru.
Can you rate it as compared to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
It's not. It's very funny. He's not like aping Douglas Adams' style. It's more. It's in a lot of ways. It's kind of more Strangelovian, kind of in the way it's topical in its humor. But it's a very, the Minervans are of course the Israelis. The Americans in the book actually represent the Palestinians. You have the Western Galactic Empire who represent the real Americans, and it's kind of obvious but very funny in the way he puts it all together. And so it's definitely worth reading. Holy Land.
I guess we're getting a little short on time. I kind of want to tell a bit of a funny story that my dad told me this last week. My dad was in town visiting. He's been on the show once before. And, my family is Jewish, and my dad has a friend who is also Jewish. He according to my dad, this guy, he's a fellow physicist, and he used to be an atheist, or at least close to it.
As most physicists are.
Yeah, and a lot of Jews, apparently.
Yes, right.
But he went through this bad period in his life. Basically, his non-Jewish wife left him and took all their kids. And so, as people sometimes do when they're going through a personal crisis, he threw himself into his religion and became some breed of Orthodox Jew. So, it's 25 years later, and or something like that. His daughter comes to him. His daughter comes to him, and she says that she's getting married to a Jewish guy, and she figures this will make him happy, of course, because he's this big Orthodox Jew. So she says, would you like to come to the wedding? Well, he can't come to the wedding. He declines to come because of a technicality of Jewish laws. You see, Judaism is passed down by the mother. If your mother was Jewish, then you're automatically Jewish, and if she's not Jewish, then you can't. Then you would have to convert. So he's not gonna attend this wedding between his daughter and a Jewish guy because, as far as he's concerned, his daughter is not Jewish because her mother wasn't. So he can't go to his own daughter's wedding.
And even as an attendee?
No. I mean, no, he can't even go as an attendee. It's
really?
Because it's like an abomination or something like that.
Good grief.
Yeah. So you may be familiar with the word shiksa, which is a rather impolite term to refer to a non-Jewish woman, especially one who is the girlfriend of a Jewish guy.
Right.
What shiksa literally means in Hebrew is abomination.
Ah, yes.
So to refer to someone as a shiksa is a non-trivial thing to do.
Right. Of course, what's ironic about the situation is that it would be okay as long as it was a wedding between two goys.
Right.
But he can't go because the groom is Jewish and his own daughter is not, even though he is. But this story has another twist, which is a happy ending, which is, turns out the groom's mother wasn't Jewish. So he's not really Jewish, and you can see them get married.
Okay. Weird. Boy, that's just labyrinthine and odd. And just
crazy.
Unnecessarily complicating life.
Right, which is what happens when you follow laws set out by some old book.
But I imagine there's all kinds of awesome fucking food at those.
Oh, yeah. Jews have great food.
Mm-hmm.
If I may stereotype for a minute.
Go right ahead.
And if I may be prurient and lurid, they also have sex at the wedding sometimes.
What, in front of everybody?
No, not in front of everybody, but they have a stronger sense that consummating the marriage is
like
sort of
right away. Goddamn.
Seriously, actually, it's the fairly normal deal that the bride and groom will go off and have sex and come back for the reception. And if there's not another convenient place for them,
does the whole reception kind of like they'll find silence where everyone's like, we all know what's going on right now.
Of course we do. I mean, just one of the things is that, Jews are basically generally not nearly as uptight about sex as Christians, especially Reform Jews.
Yeah, I mean, rabbis get married.
Sure, rabbis get married and they talk about sex, and it's entirely reasonable, actually, that if the couple needs a place to go have sex before the reception, they'll find a room in the synagogue.
Well, I want to be Jewish, too. Me too. I want to be a Jew, too.
Thank you, Cartman.
Presents for 8 days and sex at the wedding.
Yeah, but they all have nutty rules. And the extent to which you are nuts based on your religion is not determined by what kind of religion it is. It's how seriously you take it.
Yeah.
But that's the great thing about liberal theology is you get to pick and choose the rules.
And lots more
That's
fucking.
right. Do we have anything we can get through in a minute?
I don't.
I mean, I can just run through my remaining headlines real quick.
Okay.
There's a Muslim leader who used to be an extremist, but he repented, and he said that those who commit suicide to kill others are not mujahideen, Muslim warriors, but atheists.
That would explain all the prayers they say.
Yeah.
Right, and that would explain why they're killing themselves.
Trucks full of explosives.
Saying Allahu Akbar. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just stupid, although it might have lost something in the translation. It's possible. And finally, there was a Promise Keepers event at a prison in Ohio, and basically...
those guys are in jail. What can they do about their wives?
The guards were saying, listen up, this order comes directly from the warden. There's a program playing on Channel 14 about the Promise Keepers, and you are all being given a direct order to sit on your bunks, turn on your TVs to Channel 14, and watch this program until it is over with.
Shit, so who's suing?
Wow.
Somebody is, I'm sure. But the weird twist on this is that actually the warden was an atheist.